What's up, everyone? Welcome to another edition of FanDuel Friday. I am your host, TJ Zwarych, joined by my good buddy, the Luuch, Justin Carlucci. How you doing today?
What's up, TJ? Another slate. We have games all over the place today. Just afternoon games, night games. Me and you are going to be doing some crunch time stuff for the early slate. We're going to talk about the main slate here tonight. And I wrote up a couple stacks today. I did a little bit of writing for once on RG, so check out what bets I'm looking at, although we'll probably just discuss them here anyway. So anyway, good to see you again. And let's talk some baseball, man, because NBA is tough right now.
We're done with the NBA, at least for now. We'll see if we do any FanDuel Friday shows, if they get any Friday playoff slates that happen to be worth it. But we're talking MLB today. And it's like you said, it's a busy day for us, a busy day for me as well. We're on crunch time together for the early slate, breaking down this main slate here, and then I did it on the expert survey as well. I'm going to be joining producer Rob for a Spike Week, our sister site, the Spike Week NFL best ball draft later today. And so that's going to be a lot of fun as well. And then this weekend is Star Wars celebration in London. And so it's been a busy start to the weekend for me for Agents of Fandom. Some wildly awesome Star Wars stuff announced this morning. Are you a Star Wars guy at all, Luuch?
No, I'm just a guy.
You're just a guy. That's fair. I don't blame you for that. You're a nice guy, and I like
I'm
it.
not like anti Star Wars. I don't want to get crucified in the comments. I'm just indifferent. I'll check them out. But I'm usually too engulfed in trying to figure out how many barrels Chris Bassett's given up last game to get entrenched. But kudos to you, man, and all the stuff you have going on over there at Agents of Fandom. A lot of stuff, especially with the NBA playoffs rolling around and in baseball. And I don't know, Chris Bassett didn't look too good. A lot of the Jays pictures have been struggling, TJ, so far.
Yeah, outside of Kevin Gausman, basically every Blue Jays pitcher struggled in their first start. It was nice to see Alek Manoah bounce back with a phenomenal second game. The thing with Manoah is he just kind of didn't seem ready conditioning-wise and control-wise in his first start, but his fastball velo was still there. Bassett, like you mentioned, who we're going to touch on a bit more here later, his fastball velo was way down. So there are some cause for concerns here. But let's start with pitching. We got a small slate, 6 games. We can basically rip through all the bats, if not each of these teams. But before we do the bats and before we do the stacks, let's talk about the pitching pool today, because we got 2 guys up top, Clayton Kershaw, Brandon Woodruff, and then some people down low like Mackenzie Gore, who's got a strong strikeout rate, but he's in Coors Field today. Chris Bassett, who's heavily underpriced, but that fastball velo was not there. Jared Schuster, a big prospect for for Atlanta, projecting well here with the RG projections going up against San Diego, but San Diego's a very patient team who does not strike out very much, and Jared Schuster really struggled in his first matchup, giving up 6 hits, 5 walks, and 4 earned runs in his first outing. So a lot of question marks below up top. Zach Eflin is somebody I didn't talk about that going up against Oakland. It's a strong matchup. I think he's viable. Sandoval is a great pitcher, but he's got a tough matchup against Toronto. Flaherty threw a no-hitter through 5 innings, but it was with 7 walks and a hit batter last game. To me, this is a day where I want to load up on Brandon Woodruff, load up on Clayton Kershaw, and I don't think I really want to mess around with too many cheap guys. How about you, Luuch?
Yeah, I totally agree. The Cardinals have been pretty disappointing overall. They're in some pretty good spots, and I've stacked them up in some of my multi-entry builds this week, and they just haven't performed. So I think it actually is a time to play Brandon Woodruff. There are a couple of strikeouts in this Cardinals lineup. It's not as elite maybe as it was a year ago. I mean, don't get us wrong here. There's some great talent up and down that Cards team. Lars Nootbaar being on the shelf is a bit of a hit to that lineup for sure. And Woodruff looked pretty good. I'm kind of getting the Chris Sale vibes with the whole Chris Bassett thing, right? The Angels had the 2 best players in baseball, and Hunter Renfroe and a couple other guys, but overall, we know there's K's on that Angels lineup. The rest of that lineup isn't great. But I am concerned about the fastball velocity. I don't know if he's stretched out or ramped up or whatever. He also gave up 5 barrels last week too. So, we know he gave up the 4 home runs. There were some barrels there as well. There weren't any cheapies against Chris Bassett. So I'm more prone to not play Bassett today, I think. I like the Woodruff call. We have Clayton Kershaw on the slate, one of the best pitchers of all time. That Diamondbacks team is really scrappy. They don't K much at all either in their own right. You might think of the Arizona Diamondbacks, but once you dig into them, they got some decent contact guys throughout that team. I do kind of like the Zach Eflin thing. So he only threw 74 pitches in his first start. The game was a rout. Could he have went longer? Maybe. I don't know. But I'm just about to drink the Tampa Bay bathwater here with about every pitcher they're bringing up in their damn system. Drew Rasmussen here looking like Nolan Ryan. I mean, the Rays just find – I know it's a bit of a stretch, but the Rays just find guys every year, TJ. And in some of my season-long leagues, I'm already looking into their farm to seeing who the next Drew Rasmussen is going to be. Zach Eflin looked pretty great. Now he plays Oakland. We know their lineup is full of holes. It didn't work out a couple of days ago where everybody played the Zach Plesac cheap route against Oakland. He got absolutely destroyed. But I do kind of like Eflin. Now, can he go 6 innings and maybe get you a quality start? That's the big question here. But I think Tampa Bay's offense is also in a good start, which I think could put them in position to get a win. So if I'm going anywhere cheap, it's Eflin for me. I'm glad you brought him up, and I do like Brandon Woodruff at the top. Those are the 2 guys I'm looking at.
We see who Cheese has tagged right now, and it's Woodruff and Eflin right there, and that wasn't even done yet when I had started prepping that, so that makes me feel good.
Me too.
About myself. Anytime I agree with Cheese, I'm happy. If I'm running 150 lineups, I include Bassett in my pool for just in case he's back to Chris Bassett, because if he is, he's heavily underpriced. But I don't want to go too overweight there because of that. Fastball velo. Zach Eflin is somebody I really like for tournaments. Clayton Kershaw, if he's really going to be sub 10% owned, I think that's a phenomenal tournament play. But Brandon Woodruff to me is just kind of like the best combo of ceiling and floor. And so that's my top pitcher on the slate. And if I'm playing a really chalky bat lineup, maybe I'm looking to get a little bit different, but that's definitely my main pitcher on this slate. Now, if we pivot over to bats here, we obviously got a Coors Field slate today. Colorado, Washington, they heavily disappointed the other day with Washington losing to Colorado 1-0. We got Mackenzie Gore pitching up against Jose Urena. Gore has some strikeout upside, but this is a lefty facing Colorado, and that typically doesn't go too well. You usually want a righty going up against Colorado. And then the Dodgers are another team with almost a 5.5 total, actually higher than Washington's is right now, on par with this Coors Field game as well, facing Madison Bumgarner in the last game of the slate. Before we kind of look at some of the specifics, who are your top stacks on the board? Rank me 1 through 5.
We have another kind of small-ish slate. So there's going to be ownership. Everyone's going to carry some ownership. Even J.D. Davis had ownership yesterday. He hit that grand slam, and it sunk me because he wasn't a part of my Giant stack, and I was a little upset about that. So there's going to be some ownership pretty much everywhere. I like the Dodgers quite a bit, and I like their righties. I like the righties in this spot here. Mookie Betts, I mean, we're seeing just some massive ownership, but it's really kind of warranted. So I think there are ways to get different. We have Trace Thompson listed here. I'm really hoping he starts. I think he should against Bumgarner. How is Bumgarner only 32 years old, by the way? I feel like he's been pitching for 32 years. Righties really get to him, right? So I'm favoring the righties in these Dodgers lineup. It's not as sexy, not maybe having as much Max Muncy and Freddie Freeman. I think you should have those guys for sure. But these righties, I think is JD Martinez's night. Finally, I think he's going to come around and get some barrel on the ball. But Trace Thompson, I mean, I don't know if he's going to come in at 1% with as much steam as the rest of the stack is really kind of picking up, TJ. But if this guy is, single-digit ownership, I mean, he hit 3 home runs on April Fool's Day. I don't know if it was a joke or not, but we know he has some power going up against Bumgarner. So I really like these Dodgers. They're number 1. Coors Field, I'm kind of torn on both sides here. So I think I'm going to play Tampa Bay as my second favorite stack against Waldichuk. Waldichuk, decent little pitcher, not a great K rate, struggles against righties, and Tampa Bay might roll out 9 righties against Waldichuk. We'll have to see what happens there. So they're number 2 for me. Washington, they're cheap and they let you pay up for pitching. So I guess I think they're just going to have to like BABIP the heck out of Urena, because Urena's a sinker ball, ground ball guy, big ownership numbers here. But I don't want to totally get away from Coors. So I think they're 3 for me. I do like the idea of San Diego. I'm actually going to bump San Diego ahead of Coors. I forgot about them for a second. I like Schuster. I think he's a decent prospect. I think it's going to take some time. He had almost a 50% fly ball rate in his first start, struck out one batter. This Padres team does not strike out. We know there's some power here. I think they're getting a little bit neglected here in terms of how much ownership they should be carrying. So I like the Padres. And then, of course, I mentioned Coors. And then, you know what? If I'm picking a fifth stack, I want to find out what's up with Chris Bassett. The Angels are hard to stack outside of the 2 best players on the planet, arguably. The rest of the lineup is whatever. But I think you could play them with Hunter Renfroe. You throw him Taylor Warden, Brandon Drury, and you got some guys who could hit the ball. So, it's going to be a pretty telling start for Chris Bassett, I think, tonight, TJ. So I want to have a little bit of exposure to the Angels. Jake Lamb, please, God, no.
Well, a guy that's got some power in there as well.
I know.
Yeah, that's kind of like, so this even pool of bats today, like we didn't even talk about Atlanta, who's another team with a very high total today. The Blue Jays can always put up runs, especially up against the lefty. That's kind of one of the reasons why I'm wanting to just get keep a tight pitching pool and get like 70% Brandon Woodruff tonight, is just so that I can basically have a Brandon Woodruff team with variations of all of these stacks, because I'm not going to play any Oakland. I'm not going to play any Arizona. And I'm not going to play any St. Louis. Other than that, I'll play everybody. Like, I will literally play every other team on this slate. Milwaukee's not quite as high of a priority for me. I love the San Diego call. I wrote up them as my favorite sneaky stack today in the expert survey, because Schuster just couldn't find the zone last game, and this is a patient team, and all it takes is a couple walks and then one of these guys to knock a double or a home run out of the park for things to really get ugly. So I love San Diego as a sneaky stack today. Obviously, Atlanta you can go to too. I really like these Colorado righties today in tournaments. CJ Cron, Chris Bryant, Montero, Tovar. That's one of my favorite stacks on the slate, is paying up for these Colorado guys that aren't picking up a ton of ownership outside of Chris Bryant today. So I like that quite a bit. They disappointed everybody yesterday, and so I'm totally fine going right back to the well there. Same with Washington. Urania just sucks, and I'm totally willing to take lots of shots on these guys here. So for me, it's a slate where I want to differentiate my stacks, and I want to keep a tight pitching pool focused on Brandon Woodruff, and then a little bit of Clayton Kershaw and Zach Eflin, and maybe a slight amount of Chris Bassett, just in case. Are there any kind of prices that really stand out to you today? Obviously, guys like Paredes and Chris Taylor, JD Martinez, these are guys that we're looking at cash game staples today as salary savers. Luis Garcia probably leading off for Washington. The top end outfielders like a Mookie Betts and a Chris Bryant, they're still under 4K. Is there anybody that really stands out to you today as somebody that you want to make sure you're getting in your lineups ahead of the field based on their price?
Based on their price, I mean, you mentioned a lot of them, and we're just seeing some ridiculous ownership numbers, and that's why they're in good spots. I know you mentioned Flaherty, and I just think some Milwaukee exposure is warranted. I'm looking at like Rowdy Tellez, sub 10%. Contreras, we know, has power. Jesse Winker, another lefty in that lineup. I mean, Flaherty has not been the same. He's been pitching through injuries. One of the most erratic stat lines we saw his last start, was walked a billion guys, didn't give up a run. I mean, they could really get to him early in a multitude of ways, and it could be a long relief bullpen game kind of thing for Milwaukee. So I think there's some guys in Milwaukee price-wise and ownership-wise that are probably going to be, in the total backseat here. I mean, we mentioned a ton of great stacks. I mean, it really is an interesting slate for it only being a handful of games, TJ. So I think Milwaukee is interesting. We got some guys on Garrett Mitchell and some of the boys here. I mean, this is a large field play for sure, but
I love this. I'm so happy you went there because Tellez I wrote up as my under the radar home run call today on the expert survey. These guys are cheap. This is a strong, like you have the ability with guys like Mitchell and Terang to get a lot of speed with Winker and a super cheap William Contreras, a super cheap Rowdy Tellez. Like this to me is the biggest misprice on the slate at 2.5K. And it leaves you with almost 3.4K for these last few positions. You get third base, outfield, and utility, some strong positions here to fill out with Brandon Woodruff. And you can see based on these ownerships how different you're getting here. You want to do it with something like the Dodgers. Mix in a guy like Trace Thompson that we talked about, who is cheap, nice salary saver. You can fit pardon me. You can fit Chris Taylor in your shortstop position, and it leaves you 4K for guys like you can fit a Mookie Betts there and another spend up at third base. I love that spot today. And then the other place that really stands out as just like cheap options today is obviously Washington, and then as well as who was that? Where was that other? And of course on San Diego, Nelson Cruz batting cleanup today at 2.3K. Kim is nice and cheap. Cronenworth and the lefty is going to be nice and cheap. Yes, there are expensive guys like Bogarts, Soto, and Machado that we want to pay up for, but Machado at 3.5K at third base, sub 10% ownership. That's another play I love. I really like the idea of doing like a Machado, Kim, Cruz, and then either Bogarts or Soto to fill out my stack here for San Diego to save some salary as well.
Yeah, and just to back the thought on the Angels, Trout and Ohtani are both exactly 3-1 to hit home runs today, which even for them is pretty tight. So I'm thinking Vegas is on the Chris Bassett gave up a bunch of barrels train as well. But that Brewers stack is really interesting. When you play DFS and you play tournaments, and it's so hard to make ROI as it is, it feels uncomfortable. But if you're not finishing the top 5, top 6 or 7, I mean, 10th place in a large field GPP isn't even a fantastic night anymore if you're putting in, a decent volume of lineups. So go for it. Like you said, mix in some of those Dodgers with the low-owned Brewers, and you have a really unique build there. And we're not saying it's going to totally smash, but Flaherty's not the same pitcher, and there was really nothing about that first start that made me feel good about him.
Oh, so lucky. So many walks, hit batters, deep fly ball outs, hard hits to third base that Arenado would just make an amazing play on. So definitely a lot of upside with a guy like Flaherty if he's still unable to hit the zone like he was in his last start. That'll do it for another edition of FanDuel Friday. Luuch and I are going to be back on NBA Crunch Time. Check out the expert survey for some great content as well. We always got so much stuff cooking up at RotoGrinders, scores and odds, etc. We thank FanDuel for our sponsorship for this wonderful show, and we will see you next week.